Before the Fellowship was the greatest story you've never heard. I'm Cameron.
I'm Dan.
I'm Greg.
Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Last time we continued Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. Sauron continued war with the elves. Eregion was laid waste, and Celebrimbor was slain. Elrond established Rivendell. Sauron collected the remaining rings of power and gave 7 to the dwarves and 9 to men. Dwarves proved hard to tame, but the influence of the rings led them to seek great wealth, often to their demise. Men proved easier to rule. The 9 kings grew in might and power, but ultimately succumbed to the power of the One Ring and were made ring-wraiths, Sauron's most powerful servants. Sauron grew in power, gathering orcs and other beasts, and ruling over most men in the south and east. Sauron left Middle-earth for a time, as it is recounted in Akallabeth. When he returned, he found that Gil-galad's realm had grown even beyond the Misty Mountains. The Númenorians arrived in Middle-earth. Elendil landed in Lindon, befriended Gil-galad, and established the kingdom of Arnor. Isildur and Anárion landed in the mouths of Anduin and established the kingdom of Gondor. The Palantiri were spread throughout Arnor and Gondor. Today we continue Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, beginning on page 292 of the second edition. Thus the exiles of Númenor established their realms in Arnor and in Gondor. But ere many years had passed, it became manifest that their enemy Sauron had also returned. He came in secret, as has been told, to his ancient kingdom of Mordor, beyond the Ephel-dwith, the mountains of shadow, and that country marched with Gondor upon the east. There above the valley of Gorgoroth was built his fortress, vast and strong, Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower. And there was a fiery mountain in that land that the elves named Orodruin. Indeed, for that reason, Sauron had set there his dwelling long before, for he used that fire that welled there from the heart of the earth in his sorceries and in his forging. And in the midst of the land of Mordor he had fashioned the ruling ring. There now he brooded in the dark, until he had wrought for himself a new shape, and it was terrible. For his fair semblance had departed forever when he was cast into the abyss at the drowning of Númenor. He took up again the great ring, and clothed himself in power, and the malice of the eye of Sauron few even of the great among elves and men could endure. Now Sauron prepared for war against the Eldar and the men of Westernesse, and the fires of the mountain were wakened again. Wherefore, seeing the smoke of Orodruin from afar, and perceiving that Sauron had returned, the Númenorians named that mountain anew Amon Amarth, which is Mount Doom. And Sauron gathered to him great strength of his servants out of the east and the south, and among them were not a few of the high race of Númenor. For in the days of the sojourn of Sauron in the land, the hearts of well-nigh all its people had been turned towards darkness. Therefore many of those who sailed east in that time, and made fortresses and dwellings upon the coasts, were already bent to his will. And they served him still gladly in Middle-earth. But because of the power of Gil-galad, these renegades, lords both mighty and evil, for the most part took up their abodes in the southlands far away. Yet 2 there were, Herimor and Fuinir, who rose to power among the Haradrim, a great and cruel people that dwelt in the wide lands south of Mordor, beyond the mouths of Anduin. When therefore Sauron saw his time, he came with great force against the new realm of Gondor, and he took Minas Ithil, and he destroyed the white tree of Isildur that grew there. But Isildur escaped, and taking with him a seedling of the tree, he went with his wife and his sons by ship down the river. And they sailed from the mouths of Anduin, seeking Elendil. Meanwhile Anárion held Osgiliath against the enemy, and for that time drove him back to the mountains. But Sauron gathered his strength again, and Anárion knew that unless help should come, his kingdom would not long stand. Now Elendil and Gil-galad took counsel together, for they perceived that Sauron would grow too strong and would overcome all his enemies one by one if they did not unite against him. Therefore they made that league which is called the Last Alliance, and they marched east into Middle-earth, gathering a great host of elves and men. And they halted for a while at Imladris. It is said that the host that was there assembled was fairer and more splendid in arms than any that had since been seen in Middle-earth, and none greater has been mustered since the host of the Valar went against Thangorodrim. From Imladris they crossed the misty mountains by many passes, and marched down the river Anduin, and so came at last upon the host of Sauron on Dagorlad, the battle plain, which lies before the gate of the Black Land. All living things were divided in that day, and some of every kind, even of beasts and birds, were found in either host, save the elves only. They alone were undivided, and followed Gil-galad. Of the dwarves few fought upon either side, but the kindred of Durin of Moria fought against Sauron. The host of Gil-galad and Elendil had the victory, for the might of the elves was still great in those days, and the Númenorians were strong and tall, and terrible in their wrath. Against Aeglos, the spear of Gil-galad, none could stand, and the sword of Elendil filled orcs and men with fear, for it shone with the light of the sun and of the moon, and it was named Narsil. Then Gil-galad and Elendil passed into Mordor and encompassed the stronghold of Sauron, and they laid siege to it for 7 years, and suffered grievous loss by fire and by the darts and bolts of the enemy, and Sauron sent many sorties against them. There in the valley of Gorgoroth, Anárion son of Elendil was slain, and many others. But at the last the siege was so strait that Sauron himself came forth, and he wrestled with Gil-galad and Elendil, and they both were slain. And the sword of Elendil broke under him as he fell. But Sauron also was thrown down, and with the hilt shard of Narsil, Isildur cut the ruling ring from the hand of Sauron and took it for his own. Then Sauron was for that time vanquished, and he forsook his body, and his spirit fled far away and hid in waste places, and he took no visible shape again for many long years. Thus began the third age of the world, after the eldest days and the black years, and there was still hope in that time in the memory of mirth, and for long the white tree of the Eldar flowered in the courts of the kings of men. For the seedling which he had saved, Isildur planted in the citadel of Anor, in memory of his brother, ere he departed from Gondor. The servants of Sauron were routed and dispersed, yet they were not wholly destroyed. And though many men turned now from evil and became subject to the heirs of Elendil, yet many more remembered Sauron in their hearts and hated the kingdoms of the west. The Dark Tower was leveled to the ground, yet its foundations remained, and it was not forgotten. The Númenorians indeed set a guard upon the land of Mordor, but none dared dwell there because of the terror of the memory of Sauron, and because of the mountain of fire that stood nigh to Barad-dûr, and the valley of Gorgoroth was filled with ash. Many of the elves and many of the Númenorians and of men who were their allies had perished in the battle and the siege, and Elendil the Tall and Gil-galad the High King were no more. Never again was such a host assembled, nor was there any such league of elves and men, for after Elendil's day the two kindreds became estranged. The ruling ring passed out of the knowledge even of the wise in that age, yet it was not unmade, for Isildur would not surrender it to Elrond and Círdan who stood by. They counseled him to cast it into the fire of Orodruin, nigh at hand, in which it had been forged, so that it would perish. and the power of Sauron be forever diminished, and he should remain only as a shadow of malice in the wilderness. But Isildur refused this counsel, saying, "This I will have as weregild for my father's death and my brother's. Was it not I that dealt the enemy his death blow?" And the ring that he held seemed to him exceedingly fair to look on, and he would not suffer it to be destroyed. Taking it therefore, he returned at first to Minas Ithil, and there planted the white tree in memory of his brother Anárion. But soon he departed, and after he had given counsel to Elendil, his brother's son, he had committed to him the realm of the south. He bore away the ring, to be an heirloom of his house, and marched north from Gondor by the way that Elendil had come. And he forsook the south kingdom, for he purposed to take up his father's realm in Barad-dûr, far from the shadow of the Black Land. But Isildur was overwhelmed by a host of orcs that lay in wait in the misty mountains, and they descended upon him at unawares in his camp between the greenwood and the great river, nigh to Loeg Nigloron, the Gladden fields. For he was heedless and set no guard, deeming that all his foes were overthrown. There well nigh all his people were slain, and among them were his 3 elder sons, Elendur, Aratan, and Girayan. But his wife and his younger son, Valandil, he had left in Imladris when he went to the war. Isildur himself escaped by means of the ring, for when he wore it, he was invisible to all eyes. But the orcs hunted him by scent and slot until he came to the river and plunged in. There the ring betrayed him and avenged its maker, for it slipped from his finger as he swam, and it was lost in the water. Then the orcs saw him as he labored in the stream, and they shot him with many arrows, and that was his end. Only 3 of his people came ever back over the mountains after long wandering, and of these one was Otar, his esquire, to whose keeping he had given the shards of the sword of Elendil. Thus Narsil came in due time to the hand of Valandil, Isildur's heir, in Imladris. But the blade was broken, and its light was extinguished, and it was not forged anew. And Master Elrond foretold that this would not be done until the ruling ring should be found again, and Sauron should return. But the hope of elves and men was that these things might never come to pass. Valandil took up his abode in the Númenor, but his folk were diminished. And of the Númenorians and of the men of Barad-dûr, there remained now too few to people the land or to maintain all the places that Elendil had built. In Dagorland and in Mordor and upon the Gladden fields many had fallen. And it came to pass after the days of Eärendil, the 7th king that followed Valandil, that the men of Westerness, the Dunedain of the north, became divided into petty realms and lordships, and their foes devoured them one by one. Ever they dwindled with the years, until their glory passed, leaving only green mounds in the grass. At length naught was left of them but a strange people, wandering secretly in the wild, and other men knew not their homes nor the purpose of their journeys, and save in Imladris, in the house of Elrond, their ancestry was forgotten. Yet the shards of the sword were cherished during many lives of men by the heirs of Isildur, and their line from father to son remained unbroken. In the south, the realm of Gondor endured, and for a time its splendor grew, until it recalled the wealth and majesty of Númenor ere it fell. High towers the people of Gondor built, and strong places, and havens of many ships, and the winged crown of the kings of men was held in awe by people of many lands and tongues. For many a year the white tree grew before the king's house in Minas Ithil, the seed of that tree which Isildur brought out of the deeps of the sea from Númenor, and the seed before that came from Avalone, and before that from Valinor, in the day before days when the world was young. Yet at last, in the wearing of the swift years of Middle-earth, Gondor waned, and the line of Elendil, son of Anárion, failed, for the blood of the Númenorians became much mingled with that of other men, and their power and wisdom was diminished, and their lifespan was shortened, and the watch upon Mordor slumbered. And in the days of Telemnar, the 3rd and 20th of the line of Elendil, a plague came upon dark winds out of the east, and it smote the king and his children, and many of the people of Gondor perished. Then the forts and the borders of Mordor were deserted, and Minas Ithil was emptied of its people, and evil entered again into the black land secretly, and the ashes of Gorgoroth were stirred as by a cold wind, for dark shapes gathered there. It is said that those were indeed the Uleri, whom Sauron called the Nazgûl, the 9 ring-wraiths that had long remained hidden, but returned now to prepare the ways of their master, for he had begun to grow again. And then the days of Eärendil, they made their first stroke, and they came by night out of Mordor over the passes of the mountains of shadow, and took Minas Ithil for their abode, and they made it a place of such dread that none dared to look upon it. Thereafter it was called Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery, and Minas Morgul was ever at war with Minas Anor in the west. Then Osgiliath, which in the waning of the people had long been deserted, became a place of ruins and a city of ghosts. But Minas Anor endured, and it was named anew Minas Tirith, the Tower of Guard. For there the kings caused to be built in the citadel a white tower, very tall and fair, and its eye was upon many lands. Proud still and strong was that city, and in it the white tree still flowered for a while before the house of the kings. And there the remnant of the Númenorians still defended the passage of the river against the terrors of Minas Morgul and against all the enemies of the west, orcs and monsters and evil men. And thus the lands behind them, west of Anduin, were protected from war and destruction. Still Minas Tirith endured after the days of Eärendil, son of Eärendil, and the last king of Gondor. He it was that rode alone to the gates of Minas Morgul to meet the challenge of the Morgul lord, and he met him in single combat. But he was betrayed by the Nazgûl, and taken alive into the city of torment, and no living man saw him ever again. Now Eärendil left no heir, but when the line of the kings failed, the stewards of the house of Mardil, the faithful, ruled the city in its ever-shrinking realm. And the Rohirrim, the horsemen of the north, came and dwelt in the green land of Rohan, which before was named Calenardon, and was a part of the kingdom of Gondor. And the Rohirrim aided the lords of the city in their wars. And northward, beyond the falls of Rauros and the gates of Argonath, there were as yet other defenses, powers more ancient of which men knew little, against whom the things of evil did not dare to move, until in the ripening of time their dark lord Sauron should come forth again. And until that time was come, never again after the days of Eärendil did the Nazgûl dare to cross the river, or to come forth from their city in shape visible to men. So in summary, after falling into the abyss of Númenor, Sauron reestablishes his kingdom in Mordor and makes war upon men and elves. Sauron takes Minas Ithil. Isildur flees in search of Elendil. Anárion fights back Sauron but recognizes that a greater force is needed. The last alliance is formed, and a war is waged against Sauron. Anárion is slain, but the assault comes all the way to the tower of Barad-dûr, where it is sieged for 7 years. Sauron comes forth and kills Gil-galad and Elendil, but Isildur cuts the ruling ring from Sauron's hand, and he's vanquished for a time. Elendil refuses to destroy the One Ring. As he passes toward Arnor to make himself king there, he is slain by orcs, and the ring is lost. Narsil is brought to Rivendell, where his youngest son, Valandil, stays. In the following years, the Dúnedain in the north, heirs of Isildur, are divided and weakened. Gondor grows for a time, but the line of Anárion fails. The Nine take Minas Ithil and make it Minas Morgul, Tower of Sorcery. Osgiliath is abandoned, but Minas Anor is held and renamed Minas Tirith, Tower of the Guard. The Rohirrim dwell in Rohan and aid Gondor in battle against Mordor. All right.
That's another 10 out of 10 reading.
Yeah.
There's a lot packed in there.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I hope you guys are taking notes because I need to drink this tea.
Absolutely. Lots to unpack and talk about.
What can we start from the kind of end of that reading? Maybe work backwards.
Sure.
I really like hearing this bit of so just in general, it's interesting to me to hear how Gondor became what it is when we see it in Lord of the Rings, where it's diminished so much and Osgiliath is abandoned and everything, right? And it seems to me that there's two main things that led to this. One is a really bloody war with Sauron, where a lot of men were died. There's one point where it says there were too few to people the land. Like they just couldn't maintain all these buildings that they had in the height of their power. But I think the other part of it, kind of, or I don't know, push back on this if you think this isn't right, but there is something about Elendil's choice to try to, or excuse me, Isildur's choice to keep the ring, or to try to keep the ring. He had an opportunity to kind of.
Oh, I think that was like the most devastating decision probably that happened in Middle Earth. Like, because what happened was the last alliance comes, which Tolkien says is the greatest force that has ever come, together to fight. And at their uttermost, victory, their, small victory, they get the ring. Sauron is withered away. He's a shadow, and they can destroy the ruling ring. And if he did that, he would have solved so many problems. It would have been peace on Earth, wouldn't it? Yeah, it would have been.
I mean, right, and
because Sauron would have been killed, Morgoth captured. So is that one decision?
It's like it's a huge blunder, but it also just you see it just unfold into all these other things, right? And I don't know. I think a big part of it too is obviously Isildur had a lot of virtue and he did a lot of good things in Númenor. He withstood kind of the influence of these bad people and everything. But I just find it really interesting when it describes his decision to take the ring, and it's not just that he abandons Gondor pretty much. It's like in his pride and everything, he decides to. It's like in his mind, Gondor isn't a great enough kingdom for him, so he wants Arnor, right? Which is
he goes north. Is that the Númenorian place?
To his father's kingdom. He wants to take his father's kingdom. So he abandons his kingdom pretty much. And it's on the way that he's killed.
Speaking of being killed on the way, this could be a way that Sauron uses the ring for his purposes. Particularly, Isildur is wearing the ring, or has the ring in his possession, and it causes him to be proud and not think he needs any defenses. That like, I've conquered everyone. Just that thought, right. Sauron could have planted in his mind, the ring could have influenced him to be his downfall. That's what stuck out to me. I think that's what happened.
So I guess the thing I was going to get to with this whole bit was, I think a group of people that I want to hear more about in some kind of story. Maybe if it's written anywhere else, I want to read about it. But this is in 295. Excuse me, 297. That first full paragraph where it talks about the Nazgul starting to make their attacks on Gondor, and Osgiliath is deserted, but then Minas Tirith is taken up, or it's renamed Minas Tirith Tower of the Guard, and the people there, that's who I want to hear about. These people who they didn't shirk their responsibility. They like hunkered down and are like, okay, we're the last defense against Sauron's baddies, and
it would be a cool limited series, right? Like 8 episodes. Let's tell their story.
Yeah. I just think it's kind of like with Baron way back when he's part of that group of men who were like the last remnants in this battle, there's something so honorable about that they take up their post and they say, okay, if we don't make a stand here, we have only ruin to look forward to. And so they build the tower and they just fight. They just continue the fight, it's like in the lowest point of Gondor's like the kingdom of Gondor. They're like, we just got to hold out here.
And then we find out what happens with, the Númenorians, how they kind of diminish. So, their kings are killed. The ring kind of tears them apart. They start to, over time, their bloodline starts to weaken because they live a lot longer. They're blessed by the Valar. But then over time, their bloodline gets worse and worse, and then they become like wandering rangers, like Strider. They just wander around.
Yeah. Wait, it actually says that, doesn't it?
Yeah, at length naught was left of them, but a strange people wandering secretly in the wild.
Yeah.
And other men knew not their homes nor the purpose of their journeys.
Yeah.
296.
And before that, it says that they were divided into the Dunedain of the North. Sorry, the Dunedain of the North was divided into realms and lordships, and they dwindled. So yeah, that's who Aragorn is. There's a lot of Aragorn kind of foreshadowing here, with Narsil being mentioned, and obviously that's what there's the prophecy that Elrond foretells at the bottom of 295, that the shards wouldn't be put back together until the ruling ring should be found again and Sauron should return. It's kind of crazy that Elrond is able to see that. He's like,
yeah,
we will keep that. That explains why it's on that statue of Our Lady in Rivendell in the movies. There's that statue of that lady, and then at her feet is the shards of Narsil, and Aragorn comes over pensively, conflicted about his destiny in the movies, and you see the shards there. But what we don't know as the Watcher, we don't know that this is the moment that Elrond has foretold from ages ago, long ago.
At that point, at that point, Aragorn does know that the ring has been found. He knows. I think because he had been searching for Gollum for a while before then.
Yeah, the hunt for Gollum had ended by that point. Yeah,
right.
Because that's at the council, right? It's at the Fellowship Council, and so at least in the movies, you have Boromir there who.
Because the reason he's pensive is because he doesn't know if he has the strength to resist, because his forefather,
the same
Isildur,
blood runs in my veins.
Yeah, Isildur was corrupted by the ring.
One part from the books that's not in the films that I'm gonna be honest, I've never seen the extended edition, so maybe it is in here a little bit. But it's early on before Rivendell, before they make it to Rivendell, is when they it's just the hobbits and they pass through the Barrow Downs. Do you remember this in the books?
Yeah.
It is like the creepiest horror, like, and I think that's what it's describing here in 296 that you just read, where the kings, the Dunedain are divided into petty realms, and it says ever they dwindled with the years until their glory passed, leaving only green mounds in the grass. And it just captures so well this trend from this like vibrant and prosperous kingdom to like these ghost towns. I don't know. Have any of you been to any of these like real ghost towns in the West, like the mining ghost towns? It's
in
just
America.
Like,
yeah. I've been to a couple.
It's like remarkable because it's you can see from the remains there that it was bustling and it was just full and alive and vibrant, and now it's just like dusty remains. And it's kind of what we're getting here, where we just hear about this, the kind of dwindling of these kingdoms, and what's left is just in the Lord of the Rings. I don't know if you recall this part. It's one of my favorite parts. I remember the first time I read it not liking that chapter so much, and but the second time it had one of my favorite moments where all four of them are they're captured by the Barrow Wights, and they're taken into one of these mounds, and they're laid on these they're like caskets, I think, or something, and they're in these white gowns. It's really creepy. And Frodo kind of manages to break free, and he finds his sword. He finds Sting, and he starts weighing with himself. Maybe I should abandon my friends here. I have been given this responsibility, and when I see Gandalf, he will affirm that this was the right decision to leave them. And he's just like going back and forth in his mind, and then finally he decides, and it describes it so beautifully. It says like in every hobbit, there's this seed of courage that it takes sometimes these difficult moments of testing for that to break open and blossom. And he decides to not abandon them, and to but it's just super creepy. But you just hear it's kind of like the dwarves and Moria and stuff, right? Where they've accumulated all this wealth and they're hoarding it, and so what they encounter are like these wraiths that just have these dusty old swords and crowns and stacked up jewels and stuff. It's just the creepiest thing. Anyway, that's it.
That reminds me of, so Cameron and I have a what do you call it? A mutual friend, John, and he thinks the movies are just bad. He does not like the movies. He's only recently read the books, and he's like, in the books, Frodo, his character, always is better than you. Like his choices, his moral choices, his like journey, he always chooses the right thing. He comes out triumphant every time in all of his struggles. And in the movies, that they kind of whiffed on that, because he's seen a bit more like just like and then like it bumps, so he doesn't end up putting the ring on or something like stupid. But I think that just speaks to Tolkien's just master character building. Okay, I do have a question for you guys. Sorry.
I would love to see this final section of the Silmarillion. Well, it's not really the Silmarillion, but this chapter of the Rings of Power and of the Third Age as its own film. It could even be, there's so much here that it could be its own prequel trilogy. Like this adds so much more importance to the Lord of the Rings. Like when you realize Strider's story and where like Orthanc came from, and then the city of Osgiliath, what happened in that, and instead of like just a 5-minute interlude in Fellowship, like I'd love to see it at least as a film. That would be amazing.
Well, isn't this what it's kind of like, there's the distinction between story and plot, and the story of the Lord of the Rings is really about the hobbits it's not so much about the ring or Sauron, or it's like about the journey of Frodo. And so this is like, it just like adds so much depth and richness to the plot. But the story of the Lord of the Rings is like a great story in itself. But you're right, it does add a lot, and I would love to see it. And I remember when I first saw Fellowship of the Ring in theaters, I didn't really know. I had not read the books before, and
Yeah, me too.
that opening sequence that's like narrated, I thought the whole movie was going to be like that because it was so long. It's like, what is it, like 12 minutes or something?
Here's an audio.
Like 5 minutes.
Is it just 5 minutes? It feels like forever. And I remember thinking like,
oh, I think it's like,
wow,
it might be 9 minutes. Yeah.
I bet it's on YouTube. I'm going to check while you guys talk.
But I remember thinking, is this how the whole movie is going to be? Like, not in a bad way, just like I'd never seen a movie where it's just
right.
like
yeah, it was pretty
story,
innovative. You know? Yeah,
it was so good, and I could imagine something like that with this, as you're describing, Cameron. Just it doesn't even have to be. I mean, obviously, it would take a lot to produce something like this, but it doesn't even have to be.
Where it could go wrong easily is in the characters, because you have so much freedom to kind of roll with the characters. If you don't pay homage to every piece of canon and really get the characters right, people would just be like, I don't care that you got the like factual points right, you whiffed on everything else.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the problem with Rings of Power, the TV show, is they got the characters wrong. They like factually, some of it might be right, and you know, visually it might be on brand. They just got some big things wrong. Okay, here's the question. It's the very last thing that Cameron read. And it talks about, you know, Minas Ithil enduring and there's battles, and then the Rohirrim come and help with the wars. And then it mentions, like, and northward beyond the falls of Rauros. So Rauros is, I'm looking at a map right now. So it's, it's north. You follow the river up from Osgiliath. You eventually end up in Rauros, which is pretty far to the north. And then it says, you know, beyond the gates of Argonath, there were yet as other defenses, powers more ancient, of which men knew little, against whom the things of evil did not dare move until the ripening of their dark lord Sauron should come forth again. What powers might these be? I mean, beyond Rauros, you have the Emin Muil, you have Fangorn, so maybe it's the Ents, maybe it's what's that wizard's name in Fangorn?
Radagast.
Radagast. Is it him? Are we talking about that? Then you have Mirkwood, which you're obviously really far north, like directly far north from that, but really far north is where Beorn is. Is it? Oh, are we talking about Beorn? I mean, these would be things, especially, you know, Beorn, that might be these ancient powers of which men knew little, and the evil did not dare to move against. What do you think it might be? Is there any insights you have?
One thing really quick. I don't recall if this is in the books or just the movie, but the Falls of Rauros is where Boromir's body is cast off after he dies.
And would have made its way to Osgiliath.
Right.
Because it would have gone downstream to Osgiliath. That's
his horn. Yeah, isn't his horn found by Faramir?
Yeah.
Well, it does say that they're Dark Lord Sauron, so it is servants of Sauron. We know that.
No. Look, and northward beyond the falls of Rauros and the gates of Argonath, there were yet other defenses against Sauron, powers more ancient of which men knew little, against whom the evil things did not dare to move. So what are these like?
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's like, are we talking about Beorn? Are we talking about the Ents? Are we talking about Radagast? Or is there something else mystical in between the Emin Muil and Mirkwood that we...
It's got to be Tom Bombadil over there.
Oh, you've got the Eagles as well in the north. You got... Bayon.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I keep saying Bayon. I mean Tom Bombadil. That's who I meant.
Well, he's too far away, I think.
Well, he's north though,
so.
and the Eagles are too far north too.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a number of things this could be. My first thought was that it must be some work of the elves, similar to, although she's not an elf, but like the girdle of Melian or something. You know, like some kind of enchantment on the land or something like that. And you know, here's one theory that's kind of similar to that is perhaps it's like the work of Galadriel and Celeborn. You know, they've kind of made, because don't they have some kind of like defense around?
Yeah, they have like a kind
like
of girdle type thing, right?
Yeah, they must, right? I mean, you don't just live in Middle Earth without a girdle. In Lothlorien.
If you like girdles, wait, where am I reading?
Or boidles.
If you like girdles or boidles, go ahead and rate us 4 trees out of 4. You know, what else? What other numbers are there? There's 9 ring wraiths. Give us 9 of those.
7 hordes of stars.
There's 7 hordes of gold piles. Rate us all of those. And then follow us everywhere at Before the Fellowship. Join the discussion on Discord. Link is in the description. And send any comments or questions to beforethefellowship@gmail.com. Join us next week as we finish the greatest story you've never heard, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.